Welcome to the Global Missions Podcast, a show for Christ followers who want to participate more effectively in God's work, both at home and to the ends of the earth. Visit us at globalmissionspodcast.com to find show notes, resources, and previous episodes. You can also engage with us through Twitter and Facebook. We would love to hear from you. And now, here's your host, Rob Macwood, better known to his friends as Mags.
Hi again, everyone. If you're a regular listener to this podcast, you'll know we've touched many times on the topic of change in the world of missions. Today, we're going to learn about how the Lord has raised up regional and global networks to help advance His work. And I apologize in advance for my scratchy voice. My cold is just hanging on, but we really wanted to get this episode recorded for release in September of 2017. Our guest is Eldon Porter, who, together with his wife, Becky, serves as a consultant for global engagement within the evangelical missions community. And he's a specialist in this area of networks, and he's going to help us understand just how some of the models are changing and offer us a great online resource. It's a real help in accelerating our learning, whether you're a pastor or on a missions committee or an individual learning about God's work in missions. In addition to his formal role serving with Missio Nexus and Comibom, Eldon also helps leaders around the world as they adapt their networks to this current globalized missions environment. Eldon, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mags. Mags, it's good to be here.
Glad to have you. You are certainly one of the most knowledgeable leaders that I know on the topic of global networks, and appreciate your friendship, Kath and I do, with you and Becky. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Just before we get to that, would you just take a minute, please, and introduce us to your journey in missions and a little bit about your current role as consultant?
Right. You know, Mom and Dad, my parents, were missionaries in Nigeria, West Africa. Dad was from England, Mother was from the U.S., and they met there and got married and served there for 48 years. So they were part of an era of missions that we don't really see today, but they lived there, and that's where I grew up. So when I graduated from high school, I came to the U.S., did my undergraduate and graduate work, met my wife from northern Minnesota, and then we joined the same mission agency, SIM, but this time we went to Latin America, served in Latin America and Bolivia for 21 years, then came to the U.S. and worked in the international office as the vice president for SIM's international, the Americas region. So we left that 8 years ago to focus on this challenge of a global church now, with a global missions movement and the challenges of facilitating engagement. How do we come together around critical issues? So that's my focus, and I study networks. I study criminal networks, business networks, Christian nonprofit networks, and look at the ways that networks facilitate both a platform for leadership as well as space for anyone in the body of Christ globally that is called and participating on an issue or in a geographic region, how they can come together and be a part of discussions and potential collaboration. So that's my primary focus there is on the study of networks.
Eldon, as I was preparing for today's interview, I read a brief article that you've written called Networks and Global Missions, and we will include this in the show notes. It's about a 4-page article that you might enjoy reading if you're listening to this. In this piece, Eldon, you described that there's been a major shift recently in missions, a paradigm shift from the West to the rest to now being from anywhere to anywhere. What do you mean by this? Unpack this for us, please.
Right. Mags, over the last 100 years and really accelerating now currently, we have changed paradigm. We no longer are in the paradigm where the majority of missionaries were sent from Western countries to the rest of the world. That does not exist anymore. Today, the vast majority of those that are working cross-culturally are coming from the majority world, what used to be the target of Western missions. Okay, so there are churches now there. And this change has been brought about by two primary factors. The first is the growth of the majority church and its missions movement. And this is huge. You cannot underestimate how big this is. The second factor is that of globalization and the communication factor in our world today, where you can communicate with anyone, anywhere in the world. You can Skype a pastor in from Nigeria to your church. You can do any of that communication, and people can do it from anywhere. So now you have this global church with a global missions movement able to talk and communicate with each other. And that's why today we're not transitioning towards, we are firmly in the paradigm of from anywhere to everywhere.
Well, this is a great affirmation of things that we've talked of before on the podcast. There are a couple of episodes I'm going to mention quickly for listeners. Episode 23 was the globalization of missions from everywhere to everywhere. That was with Don Parsons of Send International. And then last season in episode 55, we talked about the new role of the North American church in global missions with Paul Borthwick. If you'd like to go and check out the library of episodes, those are related to exactly this topic. What are some of the issues related to this new paradigm that are affecting the missions movement?
Okay. I consider that there are 4 macro issues, major issues that in the world of missions today you have to get your head around. The first is just the majority world church and its missions movement. This is huge. And they're doing missions. It doesn't look the same as us in many ways. In fact, it looks a whole lot more like our missions looked when mom and dad went out, and they actually went by faith. But that's the first thing. So just being aware that they're out there and they are our partners. We need to be partnering with them. The second is the direct local church involvement. You know, in the past, when the world was round before globalization, a local church could not do missions without working through a mission agency. Today, the local church has many options for involvement globally, and using a mission agency is one of those options. But local churches, whether they're coming from Sao Paulo, Brazil, or Kyiv, Ukraine, or Cape Town, South Africa, wherever, they are getting involved very intentionally in missions, directly in missions. And that's a unique challenge, which is another partner that mission agencies need to work with.
I just wonder if I can ask about that. Is that because there's an absence of mission agencies in those areas because the church has been growing up, especially in the last few decades, that there are not developed agencies there? Or are they avoiding agencies?
You know, I don't think it's the lack of structures. Structures look different in different areas of the world. Mission structures, those structures that help facilitate individuals going from one culture to another. But I think it's just the fact that today a local church can be involved. And especially my third point here, the macro issue, is the global diaspora movement. With over 500 million people moving from one culture to another culture, now we find that our backyard looks quite similar in some ways to the target that we were trying to send missionaries to in the past. And now the local church, in their discipleship of individuals in the church, can be involved with immigrants in their community, as well as what the Lord is doing where those immigrants came from. So local churches today are being able to get involved. It's a much more direct, more personal involvement, more effective in their discipleship of their members. And this global diaspora is turning missions upside down. We used to think about the mission agency sending people to another part of the world. Well, now those people from that part of the world are right here as well, and they're talking every day with their family back in the country of origin. That is major impact on missions today. And of course, the fourth area of the macro issue is this highly interconnected world. People can contact and be in touch with anyone, anywhere in the world. And that is freeing up and allowing people to form relationships and partnerships on a global scale that is oftentimes under the radar. We don't even know what's going on. We just discover, this Brazilian church pastors in Southeast Asia leading a soccer camp. The things that are happening now are far beyond the mission structures, although the mission structures are very important.
Wow, 4 macro issues that are affecting this paradigm or affecting it. It's happening before us. In this context, then, Eldon, you say that networks become even more important. And I wonder, how do you define networks and why are they so important?
Yeah, this is the huge challenge. And I approach this by asking the question, God, what are you doing? How is your church around the world, how is it coming together in an effort to cooperate and collaborate? And I started discovering all of these networks. And currently right now on the website Linking Global Voices, I track over 500 networks globally. And these are organic. They usually start over a cup of coffee. And I'll explain a little later here about what they look like. But Networks are the coming together of totally autonomous entities because they share something in common. So they might be because they share a geographic emphasis. They're looking to reach unreached people in a specific area, or they might be the kind of ministry they're involved in. But it's not a partnership. A partnership you do with people you know, with agreed upon objectives and measurable standards of how you're going to achieve that together, working together. A network is much more open. It's an open collaborative space that births partnerships. And partnerships, Mags, today, partnerships, especially the issue-specific partnerships, are becoming the platform for leadership because now you have experts on a certain issue. This could be reaching Buddhists, with the gospel. Those who do this, regardless of what organization they're with, regardless of what country they're from, if they're trying to reach Buddhists, when they all come together, the discussions that those individuals have together raises the standard of understanding and awareness of what God is doing amongst the Buddhist world to reach them. And all of a sudden, that becomes a leadership point rather than the expert that used to exist within a mission structure. These networks now are becoming this space for leadership to be able to be provided from, as well as a context or a space for people, regardless of where they're from in the world, to be able to come and meet together, literally or virtually.
Well, it was helpful when you used the practical example of Buddhism there, Eldon, that it's not from one particular agency, but it's the sharing, it's the coming together, the emerging of leadership and credibility and helps. And it may or may not be an agency or a structure, but it can be shared and accessed because that network has been established. Eldon, in your article, you have identified two basic categories of networks that exist in the missions world. Would you talk just a little bit about both of those categories and maybe an example of each?
So the two categories are this. The first category are geographically defined networks. Many of these are alliances. So an evangelical alliance of Argentina, the evangelicals that live within Argentina, or in Nigeria, or in Egypt, or wherever. So it's either the geographically defined networks are either church-related, or the second grouping under that are the missions-related networks that are geographically defined.
And by missions, you mean like agencies that cooperate together from a particular place or in a particular place?
A network of the missions movement. So in North America, it's Missio Nexus. Latin America, it's Comibam, etc. So these are mission movement. This is a network of those that are doing missions, churches, local churches, individuals, and agencies that are involved in missions. The other subcategory there is mission focus. So in regions of the world, countries of the world, people group of the world, where there is unreached, there's not an established church, you'll find mission networks or networks of mission movements that are focused on that particular country or that particular region. So all of those are geographically defined. They have actual people that are related to local churches involved in that. The second category of networks are issue-specific networks. And this is the vast majority. And we have the Buddhist networks on Buddhism. There's networks on reaching Muslims. There's networks on those that work with human trafficking, huge networks on the whole refugee ministries around the world. And it just goes on and on. Networks of these kind of ministries. And there's huge variety within the issue-specific networks, but that's the second category.
Okay. So it's like a thematic approach in a sense. If someone has a particular burden for a people group or, some mission issue, they can cooperate together, learn together in that thematic network.
Yes.
Very good. Well, on that note, just take a pause here because we want to take a short break. In a minute, I'm going to ask Eldon to share about some ways that local churches and mission agencies can respond to these new paradigms in missions. But we're going to take this short break and share a missions resource we hope will be useful for you and your church.
Are you looking to mobilize your church for global missions? Start by taking the Perspectives course. This course will give you a better understanding of the historical, biblical, cultural, and strategic aspect of missions. You can learn about the Perspectives course right here on the podcast by listening to episode 14. Visit www.perspectivescourse.org today to find a course near you. And now, back to today's conversation.
Well, we're back with Eldon Porter and discussing the globalization of missions and the great importance of networks in these days. Eldon, I wonder if you could give us a quick sketch on how mission agencies are responding to this new paradigm of from anywhere to everywhere.
Well, I think mission agencies, especially the traditional Western mission agencies, this is a huge challenge. In fact, I often say the most difficult job in missions today is the director of a sending office in the West, because the entire structure was built around from the West to the rest. And now we have missionaries coming from all parts of the world, but the mission agency that's built around the sending of missionaries, they can't set up offices in all of these countries. So there are changes that are happening. There's the whole question of internationalization, having people from different cultures of the world being part of your organization. That's one direction. The other is the whole issue of how do you partner with this global church? And that's a huge issue, but that's really another topic. But agencies, Western agencies in particular, are really wrestling with this issue right now because the world has changed and they have to adjust there.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've said very clearly, Eldon, that this is a challenge for agencies, particularly those of us from the West. I wonder if you have an example that you might share of where there's some positive growth here, where there's an agency that is fruitfully engaging this transition.
There's a lot that are really working on this very intentionally. One that I think of is an organization that now has what's called a CCO, a Chief Collaboration Officer. And this is a leading person in the leadership team whose job is to build relationships at the horizontal level outside of their organization. Mm-hmm. And looking for key contacts in parts of the world that are strategic for them. And they are becoming known as a connector for local churches. If a local church wants to connect in a certain part of the world that they're working in, then they can help them connect with a trusted partner in that part of the world. As networks evolve, the organizations need to become more of a networking entity as well. And that organization is doing that and trying to learn as they go about it too.
Super. Learning and growing, and we're all on that curve, but appreciate that example. Many of our listeners, Eldon, are leaders or influencers in their local churches. Maybe they're pastors or lay people who serve on missions committees. I'd like to go to the idea of advice that you might have for them. As they are evaluating what kind of networks might be beneficial to their church, what advice would you have for them as they're seeking to be effective with networks?
What a neat time to be involved in missions at a local church level. And this is anywhere in the world. This is not just North America. We're seeing churches, local churches from Chile, from Brazil, from Nigeria, etc., much more engaged directly in missions because the world has changed. I would recommend, just as I recommend to mission agencies, but also to local churches, that you need to develop a network engagement strategy, a very intentional strategy about how you're going to engage with networks. Now, first of all, before you do this, you have to identify and understand who you are as a church. Okay, you're not going to be able to just do everything out there, but God has uniquely gifted you as a local church with individuals within the church, maybe people that live around your church, maybe immigrants that have come there, and you realize, God, you've put us in this specific area, and we have potential contacts in these areas, this specific issue. So it could be Syrian and Iraqi refugees, it could be Sudanese refugees, it could be medical people that work on issues, with health issues in different parts of the world, or business people that are mentoring startup businesses that trafficked women are now trained to run so that they can have a platform for having income. But you have to identify who you are. And then you look at the networks, the world of networks. And if you go to linkingglobalvoices.com, we're actually in the process of retooling the website, but it functions right now. You can search according to the issues. So if you're looking at Muslim evangelism, look under the issue, pull up Muslim outreach, Muslim ministry, and you'd see all the networks that are involved in that. Then if you want to look to see what are the networks that are involved in a region of the world, you can look at the region or the country of the world and see the networks, the evangelical alliances in those regions. Now, you're not going to be able to engage in all of these networks. But if you think of your engagement in this way, that there are 4 levels of engagement with a network. The first level, it's like you're approaching a house, okay? And there's rocking chairs on the porch around the outside of the house, the front. The first level is to sit in the rocking chair. The windows are open to the living room. You can hear the conversation going on in the house, okay? And that's listening to reports, subscribing to their communication, and it's just listening. It's looking and hearing, okay? That's the first level of engagement. And
Sure.
you'll want to do that with a bunch. The second level is to actually go through the front door and sit down in the living room and be a part of that discussion of others who are very interested in that topic, okay? And that's like going to an event. Go to an event. On Linking Global Voices, I list events globally of many of these networks. The third level is if you really are focused, and there are churches that are doing this now, saying, man, this area or this geographic region or this issue is central to us. Then you start putting your leaders, the people that are involved, and you get them into the dining room table, because that's where the real conversations start to happen with those leaders in the network. And of course, the fourth level is getting into the kitchen. That's where the leadership happens on a network, preparing the food that needs to be served. And there are networks, there are churches in North America that make sure that strategic networks happen because they're in the kitchen of that network and having a huge impact.
Well, it's a very helpful analogy because you've staged the engagement with the network. It's not as if you need to be all in, fully committed without adequate understanding that it's a good fit, that it meets your church's needs or your personal interest in global mission. But you can grow into that network and probably also some will realize whether they're sitting on the porch or maybe in the living room that it's not quite right. It's not the right fit, and you're not too deeply engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is helpful because I think one of the dangers that we face in our connected world that you've mentioned is there is just so much information, Eldon. We can face overwhelm, and even a missions committee going onto the internet can find just oodles of information. And instead, what we see here is, for our listeners, I propose this is a helpful leading point. It's a place where we've got trusted expertise that can help your church learn and come to better solutions sooner, maybe with less pain. This Global Linking Voices website, the link will be in the show notes. You can go and check either by geography, if you're interested in a particular geography and learning about a network in that geography, or about a particular issue or theme. Both of those you can explore there. Well, Eldon, I want to say thank you on behalf of many of us who benefit from a website like this, because you've already curated a lot of the potential that's out there and can help protect us from some of that overwhelm. So thanks for serving in that way. We appreciate this time that you've spent with us. If our listeners would like to contact you, how can they do that? How can they follow with Eldon Porter?
Yeah, I'd be happy to follow up with you from your local church as you process this through my email, eporter@linkingglobalvoices.com.
Okay, it's simple and it's linked up to that website. All of this will be in the show notes. Eldon, just as we conclude, any last thought that you'd like to share with our audience?
Megs, I think one thing that always comes out when people look at change, they think that everything is changing, all the structures, everything. And networks are not agencies. Networks are places where you can go and find information and potential partners, but there's mission structures that need to be there. And the traditional agencies are still valid. You'll still want to work through them. You might want to work with an agency that's, started in another part of the world that you work with. However, remember that networks don't do anything other than facilitating the space for leadership and connectivity.
That's a good word. Thanks again for joining with us, Eldon. Lord bless you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, we hope you've appreciated this conversation about global networks with Eldon Porter. Remember that you can find show notes on the website at globalmissionspodcast.com, and you can use the filter there to find episodes about any particular topic you'd like to learn about. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we'd sure appreciate a review on iTunes. This helps potential listeners decide whether they'll give us a try. And regular listeners will know that you can use the website to let us know about suggested topics or interviews you'd like us to consider. The Global Missions Podcast is produced by the Jaffrey Center for Global Initiatives and Send International of Canada in collaboration with other like-minded agencies. On behalf of our whole team, thanks for listening. And we invite you to join us again in 2 weeks when we'll continue to explore this grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.